Brianna and Blake Foster walked into the Blue Moon Bar for drinks after work. To the other patrons, they looked like just another pair of professional women unwinding after a long day. But when Officers Murphy and his crew entered, the atmosphere shifted. Steps heavy with authority, eager to make an example. Then came the handcuffs, cold metal biting into professional wrists. Loud, aggressive, the enforcement of fear cloaked as law. But what none of them saw was the steel behind their calm eyes. 15 years of federal service, FBI badges, earned through dedication and resolve. Environmental crimes specialists who'd been tracking the city's deadliest corporate secret. They thought these women would break quietly. They were wrong. And in 72 hours, arrogance would meet its reckoning on live television before 50 million Americans. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you are watching from. But let me start from the beginning because this story will show you exactly how two federal agents brought down a billion-dollar criminal empire. The Blue Moon sat wedged between a pawn shop and a laundromat on East 55th Street, the kind of neighborhood bar where working people grabbed a beer without pretense. Brianna Foster swirled her bourbon while her twin sister Blake nursed a Guinness, both women still wearing their conservative FBI blazers from another long day investigating corporate environmental violations. Morrison's latest EPA filing is complete fiction, Brianna said, keeping her voice low despite the bar's din. The emission readings don't match satellite thermal imaging. Blake nodded, pulling up encrypted files on her phone. And the cancer cluster data from university hospitals shows a 300% spike in the zip codes surrounding Meridian's facility. That's when the front door slammed open. 3 Cleveland police officers entered like they owned the place. Uniforms tight across beer guts, hands already resting on their weapons. The lead officer, badge reading Murphy, scanned the room with predatory intent until his eyes locked on the Foster sisters. "Well, well," Murphy announced, loud enough for the entire bar to hear. "Look what we got here." The bartender, an elderly black man named Carl, immediately stepped back. Other patrons suddenly found their drinks very interesting. Blake and Brianna exchanged glances. They'd seen this dynamic before in dozens of cases, but never from this side. Murphy approached their table with theatrical swagger. "License and registration? For sitting in a bar?" "Officers, is there a problem?" Brianna's voice carried the calm authority of someone trained in crisis negotiation. She kept her hands visible on the table, making no sudden movements. Murphy's partner, a younger cop with nervous energy, stepped closer. "Yeah, there's a problem. We got reports of suspicious activity. 2 women matching your description." Blake frowned. "Suspicious activity? We've been sitting here for 20 minutes having a drink." "Don't get smart with me," Murphy snapped. The third officer positioned himself near the exit, cutting off their path to the door. "Stand up. Both of you." The sisters complied slowly, their FBI training screaming warnings. This felt orchestrated, deliberate. Murphy's aggression seemed rehearsed rather than spontaneous. "What's the nature of the complaint?" Brianna asked, maintaining professional composure despite the growing tension. "The nature is we don't like your attitude," the younger officer replied, "and we don't like outsiders coming into our neighborhood causing trouble." Blake's jaw tightened. "Outsiders? We're federal agents." Murphy laughed, a harsh sound that made other patrons shift uncomfortably. "Federal agents?" "Right. And I'm the mayor." "The bartender." Carl cleared his throat nervously. "Officers, these ladies haven't caused any trouble. They've been sitting quietly." "Nobody asked you, old man," Murphy cut him off. "Turn around. Both of you, hands behind your backs." Brianna felt ice form in her stomach. This wasn't random. Someone had sent these officers specifically for them. "You're coming with us." Now. The Cleveland autumn air bit through their blazers as Murphy shoved Brianna toward the patrol cars. His partner grabbed Blake's arm with unnecessary force, spinning her around to face the growing crowd of onlookers gathering outside the bar. "Hands behind your back!" Murphy barked, producing handcuffs that caught the streetlight's glare. "This is completely unnecessary," Blake protested, but complied to avoid escalation. The metal cuffs clicked shut with mechanical finality, tight enough to bite into her wrists. Brianna tried to maintain dignity as the younger officer cuffed her, but Murphy seemed determined to create a spectacle. "Face down on the hood," he commanded, pressing her against the cold metal of the patrol car. The humiliation was deliberate, calculated. Phone cameras emerged from the crowd, recording two professional women being treated like dangerous criminals. Brianna caught glimpses of faces in the gathering crowd, some angry, some uncomfortable, all witnessing what appeared to be another case of racial profiling in action. As Murphy patted down Brianna's blazer, her FBI credentials wallet fell from her inside pocket, hitting the asphalt with a leather slap. The badge and identification spilled across the pavement under the streetlight. Murphy glanced down at the federal credentials, then deliberately kicked the wallet under the patrol car with his boot. "Oops," he said with mock concern. "Clumsy me." Blake watched her sister's badge disappear into the shadows. "That's federal identification. You just destroyed evidence of our FBI?" "Yeah, right, and I'm the Pope," Murphy interrupted, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Amazing what you can buy online these days." The cuffs cut deeper as they loaded both sisters into separate patrol cars. Through the mesh barrier, Brianna caught her sister's eye in the adjacent vehicle. Blake's expression was pure steel. This wasn't over. The patrol car reeked of disinfectant and fear sweat from countless previous occupants. Murphy drove while his partner twisted in the passenger seat to leer at Brianna through the mesh barrier. "So, what's the real story?" the younger cop asked. "Drug dealers? Prostitutes? You two working together?" Brianna stared straight ahead, her FBI training kicking in. Say nothing, observe everything. The route to the station took unnecessary detours through Cleveland's industrial district, past Meridian Chemicals' sprawling facility with its towering smokestacks silhouetted against the night sky. "Dispatcher, we're bringing in 2 suspects for investigation," Murphy radioed. "Possible federal impersonation charges." Federal impersonation. The words hit like a physical blow. They were being set up. At the station, the systematic degradation continued. Personal effects confiscated. Phones seized before either sister could make contact with FBI headquarters. Shoelaces removed. Even their professional blazers taken, leaving them in basic shirts and slacks. The booking sergeant, a tired-looking woman with 20 years of weathered cynicism, processed them with mechanical efficiency. Names? Special Agent Brianna Foster, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Brianna stated clearly. The sergeant looked up with raised eyebrows. "Federal agent, huh? Where's your identification?" "Officer Murphy kicked my credentials under his patrol car." A snort of laughter from Murphy, who leaned against the doorframe watching the proceedings. "She's creative, I'll give her that." Blake stepped forward. "Call FBI Field Office Cleveland, Agent Blake Foster, badge number 1847. The sergeant picked up her phone, dialed, spoke briefly. Her expression shifted from skepticism to confusion to something approaching alarm. She hung up slowly. "Dispatcher says FBI Cleveland has no record of either of you." "Welcome to the real Cleveland justice system," Murphy grinned. The booking room's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry insects as Sergeant Williams set down the phone with deliberate care. Her weathered face showed the kind of confusion that came from 20 years of thinking she'd seen everything. "Run that by me again," Brianna said, her voice carrying the steel edge that had intimidated corporate executives from Detroit to Denver. "FBI Cleveland has no record of us?" Williams nodded slowly. Spoke directly to Deputy Director Anderson's office. "They said they've never heard of Special Agent Brianna Foster or Special Agent Blake Foster." Blake felt ice form in her chest. Frank Anderson had been their direct supervisor for 3 years. He'd personally assigned them to investigate Meridian Chemical's environmental violations. He'd reviewed their case files 2 weeks ago. "That's impossible," Blake said. "We're Environmental Crimes Division, Federal Environmental Crimes Division. We've been working the Meridian Chemical case for 8 months." Murphy pushed off from the doorframe where he'd been lounging. "Environmental crimes? That's convenient. Real specific." "Call again," Brianna demanded. "Ask for Environmental Crimes Division, Cleveland Field Office, extension 4721. Williams dialed again, wading through several transfers. This time the conversation lasted longer, and her frown deepened with each passing minute. "Environmental Crimes says they have no agents by those names assigned to any Meridian Chemical investigation," Williams reported. "In fact, they say no current investigation of Meridian Chemical exists." The room went silent except for the fluorescent buzz and the distant sound of police radio chatter. Blake stared at her sister, seeing her own shock reflected back. "Your people say they never heard of you," Murphy said with satisfaction. "So either the FBI is lying, or you two are lying. Guess which one I believe." Brianna's mind raced. 8 months of investigation, hundreds of hours of surveillance, corporate emails they'd intercepted, environmental data they'd collected, all of it officially non-existent. "Something bigger is happening here," she whispered to Blake. "Yeah," Blake replied grimly. "Something much bigger." The holding cell smelled of industrial disinfectant and decades of human desperation. Concrete walls painted institutional green, a metal bench bolted to the floor, and a toilet that had seen better decades. Blake sat with her back against the cold wall while Brianna paced the small space like a caged predator. "Impersonating federal agents is a serious crime," Sergeant Williams had said as she locked them in. 10 to 20 years in federal prison. The irony wasn't lost on either sister. They were facing federal charges for being federal agents. "This is orchestrated," Brianna said, keeping her voice low. "Someone with serious reach got to our field office, made us disappear from the system." Blake nodded grimly. "But why? We're environmental crimes, not organized crime or terrorism. We investigate corporate pollution violations." "Because," Brianna stopped pacing, "corporate pollution violations can be worth billions. Meridian Chemical isn't just cutting corners on environmental compliance. They're covering up something massive." Through the bars, they could hear the booking desk phone ringing constantly. Murphy's voice drifted down the hallway, animated and pleased with himself. "Yeah, federal impersonation," he was saying to someone. 2 of them. "Real professional-looking fake IDs and everything?" No, we got them cold. FBI says they've never heard of them." Blake clenched her fists. "Our 8 months of investigation, all that evidence we collected on Meridian's illegal dumping, the falsified EPA reports, the cancer cluster data, is why this is happening," Brianna finished. "Someone doesn't want that evidence to see daylight." The cell door clanged open. A different officer, older and broader, filled the doorway. "Ladies, you're wanted upstairs. Chief Davidson wants to have a conversation." Blake and Brianna exchanged glances. This wasn't standard procedure for impersonation charges. "The chief himself?" Brianna asked. The officer's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, yes. The chief is very interested in meeting you two." Chief Davidson's office occupied the top-floor corner of Cleveland PD, with windows overlooking the industrial district where Meridian Chemical's facility dominated the skyline. Davidson himself was a thick-set man in his 50s, silver-haired and wearing a uniform that still fit, despite 20 years behind a desk. "Special Agent Foster and Special Agent Foster," he said without looking up from their confiscated credentials. "Environmental Crimes Division. Impressive forgeries." Brianna remained standing despite not being offered a seat. "Those aren't forgeries, Chief Davidson. We demand access to a lawyer and contact with FBI headquarters." Davidson finally looked up, his eyes calculating. "You know what I find interesting? Real federal agents usually don't end up in neighborhood bars on East 55th Street. Real federal agents usually don't get arrested for disturbing the peace. We weren't disturbing anything, Blake said. Your officers targeted us specifically. Did they? Davidson leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. Or were you conducting unauthorized surveillance in my city? The question hung in the air like smoke. Both sisters felt this conversation shift into dangerous territory. We weren't conducting surveillance, Brianna lied smoothly. Davidson opened a folder on his desk, revealing photographs. Long lens shots of the sisters outside Meridian Chemicals facility, at the county records office, meeting with environmental scientists at Case Western Reserve University. Environmental Crimes Division, Davidson said slowly, as if tasting the words. How inconvenient. Blake felt her pulse spike. This wasn't just corruption. This was a full counterintelligence operation. Meridian Chemical Corporation is a valued member of this community, Davidson continued. They provide thousands of jobs, millions in tax revenue. The company appreciates loyalty from local law enforcement. There it was. The connection laid bare. Meridian appreciates loyalty, Brianna repeated carefully. Davidson smiled, but his eyes remained cold. Exactly. Davidson stood and walked to his window, hands clasped behind his back as he gazed out at Meridian Chemicals' sprawling complex. The facility's lights twinkled like a small city against the night sky, smokestacks rising like concrete monuments to industrial power. You know what your problem is? Davidson said without turning around. You think environmental law actually matters. You think corporate responsibility means something. Blake watched him carefully, noting the expensive watch, the custom-tailored uniform, the framed photographs with various corporate executives prominently displayed on his desk. Environmental law does matter, Brianna replied. When corporations poison communities, people die. Davidson turned back to them, his expression almost pitying. People die anyway. Cancer, heart disease, old age. But corporations provide jobs, stability, economic growth. Which serves the greater good? Not when they falsify EPA reports, Blake said. Not when they dump carcinogens into groundwater. Alleged carcinogens, Davidson corrected. Alleged falsification, allegations that will remain allegations because Meridian's new expansion facility opens Monday morning. We can't have complications. There it was, the timeline. Whatever Meridian was covering up, Monday's facility opening was crucial. Blake's hand moved casually toward her back pocket, as if adjusting her position in the chair. While Davidson monologued, her fingers palmed several business cards from his desk, cards with Meridian Chemical letterhead and direct phone numbers. The expansion represents $2 billion in investment, Davidson continued. 1,500 new jobs. You two understand why that might take priority over some theoretical environmental concerns. Theoretical? Brianna's voice rose. We have documented evidence of... You have nothing, Davidson cut her off. As far as anyone knows, you're not federal agents. Your investigation doesn't exist. Your evidence will disappear. The threat was explicit now. Unless, Davidson sat back down, you decide to be reasonable. The county jail's holding cells were a step down from the police station, older, more crowded, reeking of industrial cleaning solution mixed with human despair. Blake and Brianna found themselves in a large communal cell with a dozen other women, mostly overnight drunk and disorderly cases waiting for morning arraignment. Keep to yourselves, advised a woman with track marks and hollow eyes. Guards here don't like troublemakers. But it was another woman who caught their attention. Elderly, black, wearing layers of mismatched clothing that marked her as homeless. She sat in the corner, muttering to herself and sketching in a notebook with a stubby pencil. Crazy Sarah, whispered one of the other inmates. Been in and out for years. Thinks she's some kind of scientist. The woman looked up at the mention of her name, and Brianna was surprised by the clarity in her eyes. Not crazy at all. Calculating, intelligent, and very much aware of her surroundings. As the night wore on and other inmates fell asleep, the woman approached them quietly. "You're not supposed to be here," she whispered, her voice carrying an educated accent at odds with her appearance. Blake studied her more carefully. "What makes you say that?" "Because I've been watching this place for 3 years, and federal agents don't usually end up in county holding unless something's very wrong." Brianna felt her pulse quicken. "Who says we're federal agents?" The woman smiled sadly. "Because you move like law enforcement. You observe like investigators. And you're asking the same questions I've been asking about Meridian Chemical Corporation." The name hung between them like an electric current. "Dr. Sarah Johnson," the woman said, extending a weathered hand. "Formerly Chief Environmental Chemist, Meridian Chemical Corporation. Currently persona non grata and occasional guest of Cleveland County Jail." Blake's eyes widened. "You worked for Meridian?" "For 15 years, Dr. Johnson replied. "Until I discovered what they were really doing to this community. Until I tried to blow the whistle. Until they destroyed my career, my reputation, and my life." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to barely audible. "The fish in Lake Erie didn't just die naturally. And neither did the 3,000 people in the cancer clusters surrounding Meridian's facility." Dr. Johnson's notebook was filled with cramped handwriting, chemical formulas, and hand-drawn maps of Cleveland's industrial district. She shared it cautiously, using her body to shield the pages from security cameras. "Meridian's been dumping hexachlorocyclohexane directly into the Cuyahoga River tributary system for 12 years, she whispered. "Industrial-grade benzene, toluene, and xylene compounds, all Class A carcinogens." Brianna memorized each chemical name, her environmental crimes training, helping her understand the devastating implications. "Those compounds bioaccumulate. They don't break down naturally." "Exactly. They concentrate in the food chain, in the groundwater, in the air people breathe." Dr. Johnson turned a page, revealing meticulous death records. Childhood leukemia rates in the surrounding zip codes, 400% above national average, liver cancer, 600%, lung cancer in non-smokers, 800%. Blake studied the data, her heart sinking. How many people? Conservative estimate? 3,000 excess cancer deaths over 12 years. Could be twice that number. Dr. Johnson's voice cracked. Children mostly. Elderly. People who couldn't afford to move away from the contaminated areas. The cell felt smaller suddenly, the air heavier. Brianna understood now why they'd been targeted, why their investigation had been shut down from above. "Where's your evidence?" Blake asked. "Original data, not copies." Dr. Johnson smiled grimly. "Hidden. Meridian destroyed my official files, discredited my research, had me committed for psychiatric evaluation twice. But I kept backups." "Where?" "An abandoned warehouse on East 45th Street. Old Meridian storage facility they forgot about. I've been documenting everything for 3 years. Air quality readings, soil samples, water contamination levels, plus the internal corporate emails I copied before they fired me." She tore a page from her notebook, writing an address in careful script. "Building's condemned, but the basement lab still has power. Environmental monitoring equipment Meridian wrote off as destroyed. It's all there. Proof that they knew exactly what they were doing." Brianna pocketed the address. "Why are you telling us this?" "Because federal environmental crimes agents might actually have the authority to do something about it." Dr. Johnson's eyes filled with tears. "Because those children deserve justice. Because someone needs to remember that they lived." Morning brought new humiliation. A conference room at Cleveland PD filled with expensive suits and leather briefcases. The contrast was deliberate. 2 women in wrinkled shirts sitting across from a legal team that probably cost more per hour than most people made in a month. James Morrison, Meridian Chemical's CEO, commanded attention without effort. silver-haired, impeccably dressed, wearing confidence like cologne. Beside him sat Victoria Hayes, corporate counsel, her Armani suit sharp enough to cut glass and her smile twice as cold. "Ladies," Morrison began, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from boardrooms and congressional hearings. "I understand there's been some confusion about your credentials." Behind them stood Chief Davidson, playing the role of local facilitator, while a court reporter sat up in the corner to document everything. "No confusion," Brianna replied evenly. "We're federal agents investigating environmental crimes." Victoria Hayes laughed, a sound like ice clinking in expensive crystal. "Ms. Foster, impersonating federal agents is a serious felony. But Meridian Chemical believes in community service." She opened her briefcase and withdrew a thick folder, letting it fall open slightly. Inside, Brianna caught glimpses of internal Meridian documents, the kind of evidence that could prove their case. The folder's contents were clearly visible, almost as if Victoria wanted them to see. "We're prepared to be generous," Morrison continued. "Meridian Chemical has significant community investment to protect. Our new facility opening Monday represents the largest environmental compliance investment in Ohio's history." "Environmental compliance," Blake repeated. "Absolutely. State-of-the-art emission controls, groundwater monitoring, air quality systems." Morrison's pride was genuine, which made it more disturbing. 15 years of perfect environmental compliance reports. Victoria Hayes shifted, and the folder slipped slightly more, revealing EPA report headers and what looked like falsified emission data. Her movement seemed accidental, but Blake caught her eye for just an instant, long enough to see something that might have been regret. "Of course," Morrison continued, "we can't have complications during our expansion launch. Negative publicity, unfounded allegations, that sort of thing." The threat was wrapped in silk, but it was still a threat. Morrison leaned back in his chair with the casual arrogance of a man who'd never faced real consequences. His next words would later be replayed in congressional hearings, quoted in environmental law textbooks, and remembered as the moment corporate hubris became corporate downfall. "You have to understand the bigger picture," Morrison said, gesturing toward the window overlooking Cleveland's industrial district. "Environmental regulations are written by people who've never run a business, never met a payroll, never understood economic reality." Blake kept her expression neutral while memorizing every word. Morrison was confessing, and he didn't even realize it. "Take our emission standards," Morrison continued. "The EPA requires reporting levels that would shut down half of American manufacturing if strictly enforced. So we provide data that reflects economic reality rather than theoretical ideals." Victoria Hayes shot him a warning look, but Morrison was enjoying his audience too much to stop. "Our environmental compliance reports show exactly what they need to show. Numbers that keep regulators happy while keeping American workers employed. 15 years of perfect compliance, because we understand how to balance environmental concerns with economic necessity." Brianna translated in her head, 15 years of falsified reports to cover systematic violations. "The benzene readings, for instance," Morrison said, warming to his theme. "If we reported actual atmospheric levels, the EPA would demand expensive retrofitting that could cost hundreds of millions. But if we report manageable levels, levels that reflect responsible corporate stewardship, everyone benefits." Blake memorized the specific violation codes he mentioned: benzene atmospheric release standards, EPA reporting requirements, environmental impact assessments, legal ammunition for later. "And the beautiful thing," Morrison said, his smile widening, "is that environmental crimes are almost impossible to prosecute. The chain of evidence is too complex, the science too specialized, the legal standards too vague. Corporate environmental lawyers earn their fees by understanding these nuances." Victoria Hayes finally intervened. "James, perhaps we should focus on resolving the immediate situation." But the damage was done. Morrison had just confessed to systematic environmental law violations in front of witnesses. and Blake Foster had a perfect memory for legal testimony. The laptop screen flickered to life, revealing the familiar face of Deputy Director Frank Anderson from FBI Cleveland. Blake felt a surge of relief. Finally, someone who could sort out this nightmare and restore their official status. "Deputy Director Anderson," Brianna said formally. "Special Agents Brianna and Blake Foster, Environmental Crimes Division. We need immediate assistance." Anderson's face on the screen remained impassive, but something was wrong. His usual warmth was gone, replaced by bureaucratic distance. "I'm afraid there's been some confusion," Anderson said, his voice carrying official finality. "The FBI has no record of Special Agents Brianna Foster or Blake Foster assigned to Environmental Crimes Division." Blake felt the world tilt. "Sir, you assigned us to the Meridian Chemical Investigation 8 months ago. You reviewed our case files 2 weeks ago in your office." Anderson's hand moved unconsciously to his wedding ring, twisting it. The same nervous tick Blake had noticed during their last briefing when he'd seemed uncomfortable discussing their investigation's scope. "I have no knowledge of any Meridian Chemical investigation," Anderson stated. "Environmental Crimes Division has conducted no operations in the Cleveland area." Morrison leaned forward with obvious satisfaction. "As I explained, sometimes people create elaborate fantasies about law enforcement careers that never existed." But Brianna was watching Anderson carefully, noting the micro-expressions that betrayed his discomfort. The man on screen wasn't confused. He was lying. "Sir," Blake pressed, "our badge numbers are 1847 and 1848. You personally assigned those numbers when we transferred from Detroit field office." Anderson's eye twitched almost imperceptibly. "Your assignment was never authorized. You're on your own." The words hit like physical blows, not just disavowal, abandonment. Victoria Hayes closed her laptop with theatrical finality. "I think that settles the matter of your credentials." But Blake had caught something in Anderson's phrasing. "You're on your own" wasn't FBI standard language for denying agents' existence. It was a warning, carefully worded to avoid legal liability while conveying a message. Anderson knew exactly who they were, and he was telling them they'd been cut loose deliberately. Morrison stood, straightening his tie with satisfaction. "Chief Davidson, I trust you'll handle these federal impersonation charges appropriately?" "Absolutely," Davidson replied. "Full prosecution." As the corporate team prepared to leave, Blake realized the scope of what they faced. The corruption didn't just run through Cleveland PD or Meridian Chemical, it reached into the FBI itself. They separated the sisters after the video conference, a psychological tactic designed to break their resolve. Blake found herself alone in a smaller, darker cell in the basement level of the facility, a place that felt forgotten by the world above. The isolation was comprehensive and deliberate. No phone calls allowed, no access to legal representation, no contact with the outside world. Even basic amenities were withheld. The cell's fluorescent light flickered constantly, creating a strobing effect that made concentration nearly impossible. Hours passed. Blake counted the flickers to maintain her sanity. 347 flickers per hour, suggesting a failing ballast designed to create psychological pressure. Everything about this confinement was calculated to break them down. A guard appeared. Not one of the officers from the arrest, but a private security contractor wearing a Meridian Chemical badge on his uniform. The corporate reach was more extensive than she'd imagined. "Your sister's having a rough time upstairs," he said with fake concern. "Keeps insisting she's some kind of federal agent. Psychiatric evaluation might be necessary." Psychiatric evaluation. The same weapon they'd used against Dr. Johnson. "See? Federal impersonation is often a sign of underlying mental illness," the guard continued. "Delusions of authority, paranoid fantasies about corporate conspiracies. Very sad, really." Blake understood the strategy now. Destroy their credibility by questioning their sanity. Even if they eventually proved their FBI credentials, their testimony would be tainted by allegations of mental instability. The beautiful thing about psychiatric holds, the guard said, settling into a chair where he could watch her, is they can last indefinitely, especially when the subjects are clearly dangerous to themselves and others. Another hour passed. The flickering light created shadows that seemed to move independently, designed to increase disorientation. Blake used FBI resistance training to maintain focus, breathing exercises, memory palace techniques, mental recitation of federal statutes. But the psychological pressure was enormous. Cut off from backup, disavowed by their own agency, facing federal charges for being federal agents. Their investigation into Meridian's environmental crimes seemed like ancient history now. "Even your own people think you're criminals now," the guard said during one of his periodic checks. "FBI's washing their hands of you completely. Smart move, really. Why defend two agents who went rogue?" Blake closed her eyes and thought about Dr. Johnson's data. 3,000 excess cancer deaths. Children who'd never had a chance. A community poisoned for corporate profit. That's what mattered. That's not their careers, not their freedom. Justice for the victims. And somehow, they were going to deliver it. The transport to county courthouse for arraignment provided the first glimpse of sunlight Blake had seen in 18 hours. Shackled and wearing orange county jail coveralls, she moved through corridors filled with lawyers, clerks, and citizens conducting the daily business of justice. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was being arraigned for federal crimes in the same courthouse where she'd testified as an FBI agent in environmental cases. In the holding area outside the courtroom, she spotted Emma Wilson, a court clerk she'd worked with on previous federal cases. Emma was filing documents, but her eyes found Blake's immediately. Recognition flickered across her face, followed by confusion and concern. Emma approached the holding cell cautiously, glancing around to ensure she wasn't observed. "Agent Foster?" she whispered. "What in God's name is happening? The news is saying you and your sister were arrested for impersonating federal agents." Blake felt the first spark of hope in 24 hours. Someone who knew their real identity, someone within the justice system who might be able to help. "Emma, listen carefully," Blake said urgently. "We're being set up. Meridian Chemical has people inside Cleveland PD and the FBI. They're covering up massive environmental crimes." Emma's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. "Environmental crimes? I've been tracking Meridian's court cases for years. Civil suits, EPA violations, wrongful death claims, they've all been dismissed or sealed." "All of them?" "Every single one. Different judges, different jurisdictions, but the same result. Cases dismissed on technicalities, evidence ruled inadmissible, plaintiffs' lawyers sanctioned for frivolous litigation." Blake's mind raced. A pattern of judicial interference that extensive required serious money and influence. "There's someone you need to find," Blake said quickly. "Dr. Sarah Johnson, former Meridian chemist. She has evidence. Real data about the environmental damage." Emma pulled out a small notepad, writing quickly. "Dr. Johnson has the real data," she repeated. "Emma, 3,000 people have died from Meridian's illegal dumping. Children, elderly, families who couldn't afford to move away. Someone has to speak for them." Emma nodded grimly. "I've been watching this for 3 years. Someone needs to break the pattern. Will you help us?" "I've been waiting for someone to ask." The abandoned warehouse squatted like a concrete tomb between vacant lots, its windows boarded, walls covered in graffiti and rust stains. Emma Wilson had managed to arrange bail through a sympathetic federal magistrate who knew the Foster sisters' real FBI credentials, but they remained under constant surveillance. Blake approached the building at midnight, using urban concealment techniques learned in FBI tactical training. The surveillance team watching her hotel was competent but not exceptional. She'd spotted them within an hour of release. Dr. Johnson's directions led to a basement entrance hidden behind a dumpster. The lock had been broken years ago, the metal door hanging on corroded hinges. Inside, Battery-powered LED strips provided harsh white light, revealing a makeshift laboratory that took Blake's breath away. Environmental monitoring equipment worth hundreds of thousands of dollars lined metal shelves. Air quality sensors, soil contamination analyzers, water testing apparatus, all bearing Meridian chemical property tags, but officially reported as destroyed. Dr. Johnson had been busy during her 3 years of exile. Charts covered every wall, tracking atmospheric benzene levels, groundwater contamination readings, mortality statistics cross-referenced with environmental data. The correlation was undeniable. "This data proves 3,000 cancer cases were preventable," Blake whispered, photographing everything with an encrypted digital camera. The numbers were staggering. Cancer rates that spiked precisely in geographic correlation with Meridian's illegal dumping sites. A filing cabinet yielded the corporate emails Dr. Johnson had mentioned, internal Meridian communications discussing how to minimize regulatory oversight, falsify EPA reports, and silence whistleblowers. Morrison's name appeared on dozens of messages, including one that made Blake's blood run cold. "Johnson problem requires permanent solution. Authorize necessary steps." Blake loaded everything onto encrypted drives, but as she prepared to leave, she heard vehicles outside. Through a crack in the boarded window, she saw Meridian security vehicles surrounding the building. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You have something that belongs to us." They'd been watching the warehouse, waiting for someone to retrieve the evidence. Blake pocketed the drive and looked for alternate exits. The real game was just beginning. The basement laboratory became a trap within minutes. Blake heard heavy footsteps above, voices coordinating through radio systems, the systematic sound of professionals conducting a search operation. Dr. Johnson emerged from the shadows like a ghost, moving with surprising agility for someone in her 70s. "They found us," she whispered urgently. "I've been monitoring their communications." Morrison authorized direct action. Blake secured the evidence drives in her boot, using federal agent techniques for protecting sensitive materials. "Dr. Johnson, we need to get you out of here. You're the key witness." "No," the elderly chemist replied firmly. "This ends tonight. I've been running for 3 years, watching children die while I hid in the shadows. No more." The warehouse's main floor erupted in activity. Meridian security teams, not police, not federal agents, but corporate operatives conducting an illegal search and seizure operation. The legal implications were staggering. Dr. Johnson moved to a control panel hidden behind environmental monitoring equipment. "Remote uplink to Case Western Reserve University," she explained quickly. "Real-time data transmission to academic servers. If something happens to us, the evidence survives." Blake helped her initiate the upload sequence, watching as 12 years of environmental data began transferring to secure university servers. Terabytes of information proving systematic environmental crimes. Heavy footsteps on the basement stairs. Flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. "Dr. Sarah Johnson," a voice called out. "Mr. Morrison would like to speak with you." Dr. Johnson's hands moved steadily across the keyboard, maintaining the data transfer despite the approaching danger. 60% complete, she whispered. The first security operative appeared at the bottom of the stairs, military bearing, tactical equipment, clearly experienced in operations that weren't supposed to leave witnesses. "Step away from the computer," he ordered. Dr. Johnson looked at Blake with eyes that had seen too much suffering. "The children," she said quietly. "Remember the children." The explosion that followed was small but precisely placed, an incendiary device designed to destroy electronic equipment and evidence. Blake threw herself behind a concrete support pillar as flames engulfed the laboratory. When the smoke cleared, Dr. Johnson lay unconscious near the burning remains of her life's work. But the data drive in Blake's boot remained secure. 80% of the evidence had successfully uploaded to university servers before the attack. The ICU at Cleveland General smelled of antiseptic and dying hope. Dr. Sarah Johnson lay connected to machines that beeped and hummed with artificial life, her weathered face peaceful despite the oxygen mask covering her nose and mouth. Blake sat beside the bed, having identified herself to hospital security as FBI. Her real credentials, retrieved from evidence lockup after the warehouse incident, carried enough weight to grant access, though she suspected that wouldn't last long. Smoke inhalation, second-degree burns, possible cardiac complications, the attending physician had explained. At her age, the prognosis is uncertain. Dr. Johnson's eyes fluttered open as Blake held her hand. Despite the oxygen mask, she tried to speak, her voice barely audible. "The children," she whispered. "Did you save the children?" Blake leaned closer. "The data uploaded successfully. 80% of your evidence is safe on university servers." Relief flickered across Dr. Johnson's face. She fumbled for something in her hospital gown pocket, producing a small piece of paper with trembling hands. "Congressional Committee," she whispered. "Environmental Oversight, Chairman Rodriguez. He's been waiting for evidence." Blake studied the contact information, a direct line to the House Committee on Environmental Oversight, chaired by Representative Maria Rodriguez, known for her aggressive pursuit of corporate environmental violations. "Dr. Johnson, you need to rest. When you're better, you can testify." "No." Dr. Johnson's grip tightened with surprising strength. "Morrison, authorized permanent solution. They won't let me live to testify." The monitor's beeping grew irregular as Dr. Johnson's breathing became labored. "Promise me," she gasped. "The children, the families, they deserve justice. Someone has to remember that they lived." Blake squeezed her hand. "I promise." Dr. Johnson smiled weakly, then her voice dropped to almost nothing. "Hidden backup. My apartment. 1247 Cedar Avenue. Unit 3B, under the floorboards. Original soil samples. Physical evidence." The monitors began alarming as Dr. Johnson's vital signs crashed. Medical staff rushed in, pushing Blake aside as they fought to stabilize their patient. But Blake had heard enough. Original soil samples would provide irrefutable physical evidence of contamination, the kind of proof that couldn't be dismissed as fabricated data. As the medical team worked frantically, Blake slipped out of the ICU with Dr. Johnson's final gift of information. 3,000 victims deserved justice. And now Blake had the evidence to deliver it. The hospital parking garage at 2 a.m. was a concrete tomb filled with shadows and the distant hum of ventilation systems. Blake moved carefully between parked cars, using FBI surveillance detection techniques learned at Quantico. The Meridian security team following her was professional but predictable. She'd retrieved Dr. Johnson's backup evidence from the Cedar Avenue apartment. Soil samples from contaminated sites, air quality readings showing illegal emission levels, water contamination data that proved systematic poisoning of Cleveland's East Side neighborhoods. Physical evidence that couldn't be hacked, deleted, or dismissed. The parking garage's exit was 50 yards away when they made their move. "Agent Foster." The voice came from behind a concrete pillar. Morrison's head of security, a former military contractor named Vincent Kozlov, stepped into view with 3 armed operatives. Blake's hand moved instinctively toward her service weapon, then stopped. She was outnumbered, outgunned, and technically still under investigation for federal impersonation charges. Drawing on corporate security would only reinforce their narrative. "Mr. Kozlov," she replied calmly. "Working late?" "Where's your sister?" Kozlov asked, his accent carrying traces of Eastern European efficiency. Blake felt ice form in her stomach. "What do you mean?" One of Kozlov's men stepped aside, revealing Brianna being held at gunpoint near the garage elevator. Her sister's professional composure remained intact, but Blake could see the calculation in her eyes, measuring distances, evaluating options, preparing for violence. "The evidence you retrieved from Dr. Johnson's laboratory and apartment. Kozlov continued. All of it. Physical samples, digital drives, university server access codes, everything. Blake processed the impossible choice. Her sister's life versus justice for 3,000 victims. You have 2 hours, Kozlov said, checking an expensive watch. Destroy everything. The university server data, the soil samples, the congressional contact information, all of it disappears, and your sister lives. And if I refuse? Kozlov's smile was arctic. Dr. Johnson's apartment fire will be the second tragic accident this week. Brianna's eyes met Blake's across the garage, and Blake saw her sister's almost imperceptible nod. The same nod they'd shared during countless dangerous operations. Trust me. You have 2 hours. Destroy everything or she dies. The abandoned Meridian facility on the city's industrial outskirts had been closed for environmental violations in 1987, then forgotten by regulators who'd been paid to look elsewhere. Blake arrived with the evidence: soil samples, digital drives, congressional contact information, knowing it was likely a trap but unable to abandon her sister. Kozlov's team had chosen the location carefully. Isolated, sound dampened by concrete walls, with multiple exit routes for corporate security, but none for federal agents operating without backup. Brianna sat zip-tied to a metal chair in the facility's main chemical processing room, surrounded by rusted equipment that had once produced the carcinogens now killing Cleveland's East Side residents. The symbolism was deliberate, victims of corporate environmental crimes surrounded by the machinery of their poisoning. The university server access codes, Kozlov demanded, his weapon trained on Brianna's head. Delete everything Dr. Johnson uploaded. Blake looked at her sister, seeing 3 years of partnership in dangerous operations, 15 years of federal law enforcement, a lifetime of choosing justice over personal safety. Brianna's voice was steady despite the circumstances. Blake, remember why we became federal agents. Remember who we swore to protect. Touching, Kozlov interrupted, but irrelevant. Delete the data, or watch your sister die. Blake opened her laptop, connecting to the university servers using Dr. Johnson's access credentials. Terabytes of environmental evidence appeared on screen. Air quality data proving illegal emissions, soil contamination readings showing systematic poisoning, mortality statistics documenting 3,000 preventable deaths. Her finger hovered over the delete command. The children, Blake, Brianna said quietly. Dr. Johnson's last words. Remember the children. Blake looked at her sister one final time, then made a choice that would define the rest of her life. I choose justice, she said, and activated a hidden program Dr. Johnson had embedded in her evidence package. Not a delete command. A live stream activation command. Broadcasting everything, the evidence, the kidnapping, Kozlov's threats, directly to the Congressional Environmental Oversight Committee's emergency hearing system. 50 million Americans were about to watch justice being delivered in real time. The live stream activated with Dr. Johnson's final masterstroke, a direct connection to Chairman Rodriguez's emergency congressional hearing system, designed for federal agents to provide real-time testimony during active investigations. Blake's FBI credentials, authenticated through federal databases, granted automatic access. What are you doing? Kozlov demanded, but it was too late. Chairman Maria Rodriguez appeared on screen from the congressional hearing room, flanked by committee members and surrounded by C-SPAN cameras broadcasting to the nation. Agent Foster, Rodriguez said, her voice carrying the authority of congressional oversight. You're streaming live to the House Environmental Oversight Committee. Approximately 50 million Americans are watching this right now. Blake turned her laptop so the camera captured both sisters and their armed captors. Chairwoman Rodriguez, I'm Agent Blake Foster, FBI Environmental Crimes Division. This is my sister, Agent Brianna Foster. We're being held at gunpoint by Meridian Chemical Corporation Security for attempting to expose systematic environmental crimes that have killed 3,000 American citizens. The committee room erupted in activity. C-SPAN cameras zoomed in, congressional staffers mobilized, and social media exploded with hashtag Justice for Cleveland hashtags. Kozlov realized his tactical situation had shifted completely. 50 million witnesses made violence impossible, but retreat was equally problematic. Blake continued with prosecutorial precision. The evidence shows 12 years of illegal dumping of hexachlorocyclohexane, benzene, toluene, and xylene compounds into Cleveland's water supply. Meridian Chemical Corporation falsified EPA reports, bribed local officials, and silenced whistleblowers to cover up environmental crimes. She displayed Dr. Johnson's data on screen: cancer cluster maps, contamination readings, mortality statistics that painted an undeniable picture of corporate homicide. CEO James Morrison personally authorized falsified environmental compliance reports, Blake testified. His exact words: "We provide data that reflects economic reality rather than theoretical ideals." 15 years of systematic violations designed to avoid expensive environmental compliance. Chairman Rodriguez leaned forward. "Agent Foster, do you have physical evidence to support these allegations?" Blake held up soil samples from contaminated sites. Original samples showing carcinogen levels 400 times EPA safety limits. Air quality readings documenting illegal atmospheric releases. Internal corporate emails authorizing the cover-up. Morrison appeared on secondary screen, calling in from Meridian headquarters with his legal team. His face showed the shock of a man realizing his empire was collapsing in real time. "These are fabricated allegations," Morrison protested. "Meridian Chemical maintains perfect environmental compliance." "Mr. Morrison," Blake interrupted, "you're confessing to federal crimes on live television." The dominoes began falling immediately. The congressional hearing room became a war room as Chairman Rodriguez coordinated with federal agencies across the country. FBI, EPA, Department of Justice, all mobilizing in response to the live-streamed evidence. "Agent Foster," Rodriguez announced, "I'm authorizing immediate federal protective custody for you and your sister. FBI tactical teams are en route to your location." Blake heard helicopters approaching the abandoned facility. Federal agents, not corporate security. The cavalry arriving just in time. Kozlov and his team found themselves facing an impossible situation. Armed confrontation with federal agents on live television wasn't survivable. They released Brianna and surrendered without resistance, smart enough to recognize when the game had changed completely. Within hours, the domino effect accelerated beyond Morrison's worst nightmares. EPA Administrator Sarah Chen announced emergency investigation teams deploying to Cleveland. "Based on evidence presented to Congress, we're treating this as the largest environmental crime in Ohio's history." FBI Director Williams held a press conference confirming the Foster sisters' credentials and launching a criminal investigation into Deputy Director Anderson's role in suppressing their investigation. "The Bureau does not abandon its agents, and we will prosecute anyone who interfered with this investigation." Anderson himself was arrested leaving his home, charged with obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and accepting bribes from Meridian Chemical. His nervous ring twisting became a viral meme as perp walk footage played on every news channel. Chief Davidson attempted to flee Cleveland but was stopped at the airport, taken into custody on federal corruption charges. His department's evidence lockup yielded the Foster sisters' original credentials and case files, proof of the systematic cover-up. Victoria Hayes, Morrison's corporate counsel, emerged from Meridian headquarters in handcuffs, her designer suit wrinkled as federal agents seized boxes of internal documents she'd been attempting to destroy. But the most satisfying moment came when Morrison himself was arrested during a live television interview, insisting his company had done nothing wrong, even as federal agents read him his rights. "James Morrison, you're under arrest for conspiracy, environmental terrorism, obstruction of justice, and violations of the Clean Water Act resulting in death," the lead FBI agent announced. Morrison's perp walk became the most watched arrest footage in environmental crime history. Judge Patricia Reynolds recused herself from all Meridian-related cases rather than face investigation into her role in dismissing civil suits. The university server data Dr. Johnson had uploaded became evidence in 47 federal criminal cases. Social media erupted with #JusticeForCleveland hashtags as the nation watched corporate environmental criminals face consequences in real time. Blake and Breonna Foster went from accused criminals to national heroes in less than 72 hours. The East Cleveland Community Center had been transformed into a memorial and resource center, its walls lined with photographs of environmental crime victims and information about the ongoing cleanup efforts funded by Meridian Chemical's court-ordered restitution. Blake Foster stood before a crowd of families whose lives had been forever changed by corporate environmental crimes. Children who'd survived cancer, elderly residents who'd lost spouses to preventable diseases, young families relocating from contaminated neighborhoods. "Justice isn't just about punishment," Blake said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd fought for truth and won. "It's about healing, restoration, and making sure this never happens again." The Meridian settlement had exceeded all expectations. $2.3 billion for environmental cleanup, comprehensive medical care for all affected residents, and a perpetual fund for cancer treatment and research. Morrison received 25 years in federal prison. Anderson got 15 years for corruption. Chief Davidson was sentenced to 10 years and permanent disbarment from law enforcement. But the real victory was visible in the community itself. Clean air monitors installed throughout the neighborhood showed dramatic improvement in air quality. Lake Erie's fish population was slowly recovering. Children could play outside without fear of invisible toxins. A small memorial garden honored Dr. Sarah Johnson, whose courage and sacrifice had made justice possible. Her final words were engraved on a simple stone marker. "Someone has to remember that they lived." Breonna approached her sister as the community gathering concluded. "Think she would have been proud?" Blake looked at the families around them, people who finally had hope, children who might grow up in a clean environment, a community that had found its voice. "I think she's still fighting alongside us." The Foster sisters proved that no corporation is too powerful, no conspiracy too deep when truth meets courage. Their story reminds us that environmental justice isn't just about regulations and compliance reports. It's about the fundamental right of communities to breathe clean air and drink safe water. Meridian Chemical thought they could bury the truth along with their victims. They controlled the police, owned judges, corrupted federal agents, and silenced whistleblowers. But they couldn't control two determined women who refused to abandon their oath to protect and serve. Dr. Sarah Johnson's sacrifice wasn't in vain. Her data became the foundation for new environmental protection laws. Her story inspired a generation of environmental justice advocates, and her memory lives on in every family that no longer fears the air they breathe. The case changed environmental law forever, creating precedents for corporate environmental terrorism charges and expanding whistleblower protections. But questions remain. How many other communities suffer in silence? How many other corporations hide behind regulatory capture and political influence? Environmental injustice happens in every state, in communities that lack the resources to fight back. What environmental crimes in your community deserve investigation? What corporations in your area need scrutiny? No one is above the law. No land is beneath clean air. What injustice will you refuse to ignore?